And we'll begin with the introductory story of stories that we often start with. When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the world, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. And there, he would light a fire and say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mizrich, had occasion for the same reason, to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, "Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer." And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save his people once more, would go into the forest and say, "I do not know how to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. "I'm unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is to tell the story, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient. So today I thought that we would do a little follow-up on the story from last week. The story from last week was a love story with all kinds of side adventures and all kinds of stuff. But the main protagonist was Esther, who was a very learned woman who became a teacher of Torah and was respected and honored by the communities where she was. So I thought that I would follow up this week with a reference to a real life figure who lived a century ago and who was a learned woman. And her story is a little bit different than the story that we read last week, the fairy tale that we sort of read last week. And what we're going to read is not her story per se, but a new story about something about her story. So without further ado, here it is. I hope everybody can see it. And let's start. This is a story from that was published in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, over 15 years ago, and it'll unfold as it does. So who's going to volunteer for us today, please, to read our new story? A story about a story about a story. All right, John, you go ahead.
She prayed in a talit and tefillin, taught her followers Torah, and didn't want to marry. On Sunday, a group of women will visit the grave of the Maiden of Ludmir, which was discovered a year ago. At dusk tomorrow, a few dozen women will gather in the garden of Ruth Gan Kagan in Jerusalem's Baca neighborhood in order to mark a special event, the 116th anniversary of the death of Hannah Rochel Berber, the Maiden of Ludmir, a solitary woman from the town of Ludmir in Ukraine. During her lifetime, the town was part of the Russian Empire, who gained fame as an Admor, Hasidic teacher. Admor, Hasidic teacher and master. She prayed in a talit, prayer shawl, and tefillin, and like her male counterparts, she held a third meal for her followers, the meal eaten on Shabbat afternoon, which is pervaded by a melancholy feeling because of the imminent conclusion of the Sabbath, at which she expounded on the Torah. She also received Hasidim, who had questions on religious matters, and granted them blessings. It is in this spirit that Kagan, a rabbi in her own right, she does not belong to any of the streams in Judaism, and her group will mark the anniversary by expounding on the Torah and by examining the meaning of women's Torah study. The 116th anniversary is not a round year, but is nonetheless a special date. On Sunday, which is the exact Memorial Day, Verbermacher's admirers will visit her grave on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. The grave was discovered only a year ago by Nathaniel Deutsch, a Jewish researcher from Pennsylvania. On October 2003, after several years of research, Deutsch published The Maiden of Ludmir, a Jewish holy woman in her world. In the past few months, Kagan organized the establishment of a fine headstone on Verbermacher's grave. The original stone was apparently shattered during the period of Jordanian rule in the city, and there is no record of what it said, which will be unveiled on Sunday. The new headstone deliberately makes no mention of her function as an Admor. The formulation on the headstone, a just rabbinate, a word usually used for a rabbi's wife.
Just rabbinit.
Rabbinit.
Rabbinit means, like it says here, usually rabbi's wife, but it's Rabban, which is our rabbi, and then the it is the feminine. So some people use it today for a female rabbi, but as you see here from the article, the term is ambiguous. Okay, a just rabbinit, a righteous rabbinit.
A word usually used for a rabbi's wife is the term by which she is referred to in contemporaneous archives. Kagan, we didn't want to stand out too much in the Haredi ultra-Orthodox section where she is buried. In any event, she herself, despite her special way of life, was a pious woman who saw herself as part of the Hasidic world. Verbermacher settled in the land of Israel when she was in her 50s, following a wave of harassment on the part of the Hasidic community in which she lived. As far as is known, she continued to act as an Admor in Jerusalem too, because Maiden is a pejorative epithet that was foisted on her by her opponents in the religious world. Kagan and her group do not use it and prefer to refer to her as simply Hana Rochel. Several studies of Verbermacher have already been written, the first dating back to the beginning of the 20th century by the scholar of Hasidim Shmuel Horodetsky. A few years ago, the Khan Theater in Jerusalem staged a play about her entitled The Maiden from Ludmir by Yosef Eben Shushan.
Yosefa
Eben Shushan.
Right, she's a woman. Not Yosef, Yosefa. Okay.
Studies of Hasidim also mention other women.
Hasidism.
Studies of Hasidism also mention other women who gave Torah lessons and blessed the Hasidim, though they were all wives or daughters of well-known rebbes. The best known of them is Udal, the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism.
Also, right, also called Adel. Adel.
Adel?
Yeah.
Oh, Udal? Adel?
Udal, Adel. It depended on which, like Kugel, Kegel.
I see.
You
know. Whose family lineage made possible their anomalous behavior. Verbermacher, in contrast, is the only woman who functioned as a genuine Admor, and without enjoying the protection of a prominent lineage. She did have another form of protection. The large inheritance she received from her father, who was a merchant, meant that she was not dependent on the economic favors of her surroundings. Truth or legend? In cases of this kind, as Deutsch emphasizes, it is difficult to know what is truth and what legend. It's clear, he says, that there is a grain of truth in the stories, and also that there are plenty of exaggerations, to the point where it is difficult to know which is which. Deutsch found a map of Ludmir in 1840 in the Russian archives in St. Petersburg, the city that cites the house of the Jewish rabbinite Chaya Rochel, apparently a mistake for Hana Rochel. She was an only child, and both her parents died when she was still young. Her mother when she was 9, and her father 10 years later. She then lived alone, sustained by her father's wealth. The legend relates that she began to engage in Torah studies after a visit to her mother's grave, where she was injured and lost consciousness. According to the legend, which is apparently based on her own testimony, after losing consciousness, she ascended to heaven, where she was given the mission to teach Torah and function as an Admor. Her home soon became a house of worship and a place of teaching, where she gave lessons and blessed the supplicants. Those who are accompanied by holy thoughts on the road to life are not lonely and are not wretched, because those noble thoughts protect them from loneliness, she said. Deutsch notes that her followers were mainly women and craftsmen from the simple classes. At that time, another righteous man, Reb Moshe from Ludmir, the grandson of one of the famous holy men, was also active in the town and was supported by its wealthy residents. The poor people apparently did not feel comfortable with him and preferred to go to Hanarochel. Of course, it was only a matter of time before Verbermacher's activity generated a furor. People were critical of the very fact that she dared to act as an Admor and of her adamant refusal to marry. A regional holy man, the Admor Mordechai from Chernobyl, the city of the nuclear disaster, was brought to Ludmir as he ordered Hanarochel to stop behaving like an Admor and to marry. She refused to abandon her activity as an Admor. As for marrying, Deutsch cites several versions. According to one story, she was compelled to marry her Gabbai, though the marriage lasted only a night before she expelled him. According to another version, she wanted to marry, but her husband refused to have sexual intercourse with her because of his fear of her holiness or her special righteous status. And as a result of religious status. And as a result, the marriage lasted only a short time, contributing to the epithet of maiden.
The word maiden, or in Yiddish it's moed, means an old maid.
Moreover, the gossip mongers claimed that she not only behaved like a man, but her voice was also masculine, giving rise to the allegation that she was possessed by a Dybbuk, or an evil spirit. Deutsch thinks the story served as a model for playwright S. Ansky, author of the famous Yiddish play, The Dybbuk. Its plot does not follow the story of Hanarochel in all details, but there are many similarities. A woman with a masculine voice, a forced marriage, a holy man who seeks to exorcise the Dybbuk, and so forth. There is no clear-cut proof of this, but Deutsch found at least circumstantial evidence. Ansky, he discovered, visited Ludmir twice in the years before he wrote his play and interviewed residents there about the story of the maiden. Berbermacher later immigrated to Ottoman Palestine. In the popular account, her move was caused by persecution, though Deutsch conjectures that one reason may have been the fact that many chassidim moved to the land of Israel around this time. It was a period of messianic hopes among Eastern European Jewry. The exact year of her immigration is unknown, but it was probably in 1860. In the Montefiore archive in London, Deutsch found two mentions of Verbermacher's residence in Jerusalem. In two different censuses conducted by Sir Moses Montefiore in 1866 and in 1875. The same source turned up the year of her birth, 1805. In each census, by the way, she appears under the category of widows, the overall name then assigned to single women, and is said to belong to Old Wolken Kolel.
Volin.
Volin Kol?
Kolel.
Kolel now means a yeshiva for married men, but at the time referred to a community. The first census lists her as Rabbinit Rachel Hana from Ludmir. The second as the just Rabbinit Hanarochel from Ludmir.
Right. I just want to say that the old Volin Kolel, back in those days, this was before the Zionist revolution. The first Zionist movement motivated emigration happened in 1881. And the settlements of the Zionists were called the new settlements, the new Yishuv, and Jews that were living in Israel from before were called the old Yishuv, the old settlement. The old settlement was supported by donations from the diaspora. And the way that they were organized was that people were organized into kolelim. They were organized into these religious kind of unions, so that a kolel means a group united to study Torah, but it was also a group united to be supported for the study of Torah, because that's all theoretically the group did, the men, and then supported by their women and children and so on. So the kolels were the organized social units that then were allocated from the big gigantic, not so gigantic, the big general pot of money that was collected from diaspora Jewry, and it was given to different kollels, theoretically according to the number of people that were in each kollel. So she was on the dole, like every other old-fashioned Jew in the land of Israel. She was included in that particular group. Okay, here we go. Continue.
Grave discovered. It was in the archive of the Old Woolen Burial Society that Deutsch found the location of her grave on the Mount of Olives. The Intifada kept them from finding the actual gravesite. It was located by Kagan half a year ago. Kagan came across the story of the Maiden while she was a student of Rabbi Zalman Schachter, who
Later, he changed his name to Zalman Schachter Shalomi,
who ordained her as a rabbi. Founder of the Jewish renewal movement in the United States, which is considered the center of New Age Judaism. Schachter, who has for years been interested in the stories of religious learned women throughout Jewish history, is particularly taken by the story of the Maiden because he himself belongs to the Hasidic tradition, and she was a rare case of a female Admor. For years, he asked his students to locate her grave. Last December, friends of Kagan from the United States, who had heard that Deutsch had located the grave, visited Kagan in Jerusalem and asked to see the site on the Mount of Olives. With the help of Hevra Kadisha Burial Society, the physical location of the grave was located. Kagan's ordination as a rabbi took place this January in Colorado, where Schachter lives. Kagan decided to take advantage of the occasion to raise funds for a headstone. She collected $3,000 that evening. The headstone was designed by architect Abigail Zohar, a friend of Kagan's, who was also long familiar with the story of the Maiden and was thrilled at the privilege that befell her. The design, Zohar says, was determined by a number of criteria, especially by the request of the Burial Society that the headstone not stand out from the rest of the headstones in the area. They were also opposed to the building of a tent, a structure in which visitors can congregate, as is common with graves of important rabbis and admors. In light of the possibility that the grave will become a site of pilgrimage, we also saw to it that a place for candles was hewed in the stone, and after the headstone is in place, we will also hew a place for Kvitlech, notes containing requests and wishes, such as are placed in the western wall at the grave and at graves of Admors. Schachter hopes that in the wake of his book's publication and the unveiling of the headstone,
it's not his book, it's Deutsch's book.
The book's publication and the unveiling of the headstone, lost writings of Berber will also turn up. According to an article published in 1952, only 4 sentences from her sermons have been preserved. Quote, "Every pure thought that stems from the heart cannot be grasped by the mind," she said. Kagan, for her part, makes no secret of her hope that the grave will become a site of pilgrimage for women from various sectors, Haredi women as well as modern feminists. "I know that when all is said and done, she was a Haredi woman, and it's possible that if she were alive today, she would not bless me on my journey. I would be happy if Haredi women made pilgrimage to her grave to pray in their way for their Jewish way of life, and I will make pilgrimage there to get a blessing for my way as a rabbi."
That's the end. Okay, so
that's a good way to start Women's History Month, right?
Yeah, there you go. So any comments, any reactions, thoughts? What does this story trigger for anybody?
Make a great play if there were more details.
Well, maybe it did. I tried to track down the play and I couldn't track it down. There was a play in Hebrew in the 90s by a woman who was a known writer in Israel.
Doesn't sound like they know that much, though. They only have a few disparate facts.
Right. It's good material for an imaginative, free-floating, story. But we do have certain, elements of history and of society that are in the story as we read it. What are we taking away from this story in terms of what she had to go through in order to be an Admor? Admor is a term that's used for a chassidic leader because it's the initials Adonenu, Morenu, V'Rabbeinu, our master, our teacher, and our rabbi. So, and then you add all those initials together and you pronounce it as Admor. So, the Admor of Belz is the held of the Belz Yeshiva, of the Belz Chassidim, and the Admor of, Bobov, etc., etc. So an Admor is the head leader of a Chassidic group. And she, apparently was able to have certain people attracted to her leadership. So what were some of the hurdles that she had to surmount? What were some of the hoops that she had to jump through?
Well, there's the traditional resistance to women. It's Merrill. Traditional resistance of to women participating in any kind of a ritualistic way amongst the Orthodox or various types of Orthodox people.
Right. Now, when you say ritualistic way, let's be clear. As we said as we read at the end of the article, she was a completely ultra-Orthodox woman in her behavior, except for this Torah business.
Mhm.
But that meant that, for instance, she would never dream of leading services. She would never dream of making kiddush for other people. She would never dream of getting an aliyah to the Torah. She sat behind the mechitza. She sat behind the divider that separated the women from the men, and she would let the men run everything. And with, we don't know what her internal feelings were, but she completely complied with this throughout her entire life. She didn't if she got married, she covered her hair. She didn't go off to Berlin and go to university or something like that. She was totally, in her own way, devoted to the old ways, to the old-fashioned traditions, except for this one thing that happened to her that turned her into a teacher of Torah. What exactly happened, according to the legends that we have?
And that's why
She had a
fainted. Exactly. So.
Yeah, she had a Rosenzweig moment.
I was gonna just sort
Well,
of.
I think, that would be, I don't know how Rosenzweig, I don't think Rosenzweig to say, Franz Rosenzweig.
He never really told us, did he?
Well, he
No.
sort of said what he said, but he didn't couch it in terms of an ascent to heaven. He didn't describe himself as I was carried up to heaven, and then in heaven the angels and God told me that I have to go teach Torah and so on. He just had an epiphany, so to speak, that he couldn't leave the Jewish people. That's a whole beautiful story for another time. But yeah, so she has this vision. She has this transformative revelation that she has to do this, right? And she's all by herself, right? She no longer has parents. She has no siblings. She seems to be completely isolated. She has an inheritance from her father. That means that she will always be comfortable. But she doesn't really have any support system, socially or religiously, for this. This is completely brought down literally from heaven upon her, and she feels that she has this God-given mission to do what she needs to do. Remember, in order to do that, she's had to be educated very well. In the beginning, her father gets credit for that, to make sure that she was able to have access to that kind of education. That was unique. That was very uncommon. But then she's apparently really got into the deeper levels of understanding the Torah, and was able to be a teacher of Torah on a serious level. What do we make about that visit by the other very well recognized and authoritative chassidic Rebbe when he comes to her town? Remember what he tells her? He says, "Cut this stuff out and get married." Right? He said, this is too outrageous. This is too out of the box. And of course, the other part of it is get married. You cannot, if she would have stopped being a teacher, but would have not refused to get married, that would have taken some of the edge off. But the fact that she was in some kind of position of power without being subjugated to a man as the ultimate authority over her was really, really threatening. It was terribly, terribly frightening for people to contemplate. Here is a woman who has agency for herself, and there's nobody that she has to listen to. There's no husband that's going to tell her what to do. Very frightening. Yeah, Carol.
It's almost as if she was the start of the modern woman, the modern Orthodox woman.
Well, that's part of the fascination, is this back and forth. What does it mean today? There is something called what's it called? What's the initials? I forgot what it's called. A senior moment on my part, sorry. But there is a feminist Orthodox organization today. And they're always struggling with the question of how far can they push the boundaries? How much can they really demand? How much can they ask or demand to be able to be given respect and dignity? Are they always going to have to defer to the men as rabbis, or are they always going to have to defer to the men in terms of leading services? If they don't, they're always threatened with the idea that, oh, then you're not Orthodox, right? So, if you want to be Orthodox and also be a feminist, it's a very interesting tension that you have to go through. Yeah, Carol.
But what about, because I've also heard that a woman in the Orthodox community, a woman can lead the service if it's a minyan of all women. How does that fold into it?
It folds into, because if it's a minyan of all women, it doesn't count. So who cares if they do it?
Are they allowed to say the thing? Are they allowed to say the prayers that you need a minyan for?
That's what you have to ask other people. Most of the time, no.
Okay.
Most of the time, no.
I'm just curious about something. What's the difference between the definition of the word rabbinate and rebbitzin? Or is one, or is
Rebbitzin is Yiddish,
that's what I
Rabbanit
thought.
is Hebrew. But in Hebrew today, Rabbanit, some people take Rabbanit and they want to expand it out of the usual understanding of the wife of a rabbi and make it into the feminine for a rabbi. But because it has such a long history of being...
isn't that sort of a cheat? I mean, should have their own title.
Well, so a lot of people have the title Rabbah. In other words, they take
That makes
Rav
more sense.
and they make it feminine into Rabbah. But that's again part of the struggle today, of inventing new ways to do things. What did people make out of the back and forth kinds of considerations that this new group of people who established the grave marker for her after the grave was forgotten for generations, and once it was rediscovered, they had to go through certain also sort of sensitive kinds of decisions about what to do to mark the grave. People picked that up. People saw the stories there, right? What did the Chevra Kadisha, which has the kind of managerial authority over the burials and over the running of the cemetery, made certain demands. Yeah, Lynn.
Well, to answer your question, it couldn't stand out. It couldn't be overtly created as a place of pilgrimage. It had to be very discreet and had to match all the other tombstones. But my question, Deutsch, the guy who first found it, is that they wouldn't let him acknowledge it. So then it was.
What happened was that in terms of just the way the timeline worked, by the time he finished his research and he was able, with a map of the cemetery, to pinpoint where the grave was, he didn't have access because that was the 2002 was the raging intifada. There was violence in Jerusalem. There were people that were being blown up in pizza shops and so on, all of that horror that was going on back then. So he was not able to get to that part of Jerusalem to actually stand at the spot. He was able to pinpoint it on the map, but he physically himself couldn't get there because it was too...
I couldn't remember if it was the society that forbade him, but then they let her. It was history.
That was the intifada that got in the way.
Okay, thank you.
So, but what the Burial Society did was it made all those rules as you were indicating. They never would have done that for a prominent rabbi. They never would have made those rules. All of the rules that they were establishing were to completely squelch any recognition of her being any kind of religious leader. And again, when Rabbi Kagan Gan, had to organize with the architect what to do, they said, we don't want to be provocative here, because if we push people's buttons, what will happen? It'll get desecrated. The grave will get desecrated by people who will be outraged by, what are they doing making this woman into a rabbi, and what are they doing making this person into a cult figure. So on the one hand, they had to really keep her in the closet, so to speak. And on the other hand, they made certain architectural elements that recognized the idea that there might be pilgrimage. What did they do? Yeah, Lynn.
Well, so they carved into the rock a place for candles, which I wanted to ask you what the significance of the candles were. And they carved into the rock the place where people could offer prayers to her.
Right. Well, so that's a good for her to then bring up to heaven.
Okay, thank you.
In the article, it mentions the fact that people do this all the time at the Western Wall. So they write a little prayer, or they write a little request or something, and that's the kvittel. A kvittel means a note.
Well, and at the graves of other art.
And also, but it's very well known that at the Western Wall, at the cracks between the stones, people come up to the wall and they put because they feel this is going to then it'll be part of the holy wall, and then heaven will give more attention to it, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the idea of going to a grave of a holy person, the same idea. That holy person will be the mailman, so to speak, the mail carrier, to take, and it's always a male, take the messages up to heaven and be answered, right? Because they're going to stand there and going to go, God, you can't ignore this message. Here I am, I'm standing right here, you owe me. So that's the kind of folk way of thinking about it. And now they're endowing her with that same kind of religious righteousness and power in heaven, that they would do that. So they're recognizing that some people would feel that kind of connection with her. And in Israel, on the Mount of Olives, the graves are characterized mostly by stone or cement and then stone boxes that stand over the grave itself. So it's not just that there's a headstone and then a flat piece of ground, but it's almost like it's not the coffin, but there's a big piece, there's a big box that is erected on top of the grave, and either then the epitaph will be written on the flat top of the box, or there'll be an additional headstone besides that. But the big stone structure is there on the grave. We have the custom that I think some people are familiar with, of when you go to a grave, you put a little stone, a pebble, to indicate that you were there, and that the grave has not been forgotten. Clearly, her grave was forgotten for a while. But what they have in Israel mostly, but here and there in very traditional cemeteries, plots or areas in the States, is a place to leave a memorial candle, like a yahrzeit candle. So in order to make that possible, you have to have a protected, it's usually it's like a niche into the stone, and then there's a glass door so that it keeps out the wind and the rain. But the idea is then that the yahrzeit candle can be put in as a memorial light for the soul of the person who's buried there. So they're playing it in both ways. They're going to be very under the radar in many ways, but they're acknowledging that this is going to be especially cherished grave for some people. So they're going to put that kind of stuff that it's not going to stick up. It's not going to change the landscape. It's not going to change the skyline of the cemetery, but it's there for people to be able to use. So, and they're respecting also her own mix of what she meant for her community, what she meant, what the community meant to her, And now her, what Rabbi, Kagan Gantz says is, I don't know whether she'd even be happy with what I do. She's an inspiration to me, but she might be turning in her grave about what I'm doing, right? So it's a very bittersweet kind of sense of connection and yet change, right? Yeah.
Such is
Carol.
history always.
Yeah, Carol.
In her own way, she was modest.
She was very
Even though she was very modest because she wanted to do what she wanted. She did what she wanted to do, but she did it within the Hasidic community and didn't make waves. And one of the things I found interesting was that people came to her classes, not just women, men. That surprised me in the Hasidic community. I didn't think they do that. So I'm assuming there was a mechitza in the classroom.
So then not only was there a mechitza in the classroom, although I'm not sure that there was, how they set it up, but there was a mechitza between her and her classroom. And that actually, if you remember the story we had from last week, that was described last week, and it was taken from these kinds of stories, that she was in a separate room. She was not visible to her students. They could
That was Esther.
That was Esther, and that was based on the story of the Ludmir Moed, that she, the maiden of Ludmir, she taught, she was able to get away with what she was doing because she was not in public. She was not being seen by anybody. She was heard. She was in the same building, so to speak. So people would come into the whatever, the salon, the living room, the kitchen, who knows what, where they were able to sit down. And she was in the next room with the door closed with a hole in the door or a curtain or something. She was separate completely from her students, and they would have to listen to her speaking. It was, as if when you're listening to one of these Zoom classes with all the mics on, but none of the what do you call it, Sarat? None of the cameras. So that was her modesty. And that was also her survival. If she would have stood up on a soapbox, if she would have spoken out in first of all, no public place would have allowed her to do it, in the study hall or anything like that. But if she would have done any kind of public preaching, she would have been jailed and stoned. Who knows? It never would have been able to continue. So that was part of her negotiation of the system as well. Yeah, Lynn.
But it said in the story that they were poor people, working class people that weren't comfortable with the hoity-toity real teacher. So they went to her, which I found that interesting a bit.
Yeah. So we also got a little glimpse of the class struggle within the Jewish community, right? That the religious teachings and the sanctity and righteousness of people didn't exist in a vacuum. There was definitely social labels that were put on economic status that infected even this idea. So that even though that person was acknowledged to be some holy rabbi, but you didn't feel comfortable if you didn't earn a certain amount. You didn't feel comfortable going to him because you didn't fit in with the crowd. The crowd was too privileged. So she got the humbler elements of society as well.
Found her picture if you want to see it.
Sure. Do I have to make you a co-host?
You have to let me share screen. So
where is that going to be?
I think it's on maybe by video. I don't know.
I mean, I have share screen, but how do I get you to be able to share screen?
I don't see the
More.
host controls, so you have to find it. I don't know where it is.
You could just make him a co-host and that'll do it.
How do I do that?
Go over his name. John, you're expert.
Come on.
I don't see the menu, so I don't know.
I'm going to make you a co-host. I got it.
Okay. So let me get the right screen up here.
Cool.
There she is.
Yeah.
And I found the fuller picture here.
Right.
She looks like a modern woman.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost like she's in her rabbinic robes.
Right. So it's a little curious about where they got that picture from, how they got that picture. So I don't know.
Where, when is the gravestone up?
I think so. Yes, in 2004. 2004 it was put there.
Mm.
So yeah, there it's not the one with the cross.
Yeah.
Didn't think so.
Right.
I wonder if there's a picture of it somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you put in gravestone?
Yeah, I did gravesite.
Put gravestone. Yeah, so what's there it is.
Mhm.
So there's that's that whole structure. See? And here's one little thing for a flame. I don't know if there are others on the other sides, right? And it says Harabanit Hatzadekes, right? The Rabbanit, which people, if they don't know, they could just say, oh, she was a Rebbitzin, right? Right? The righteous one, Chana Rachel, Bas, right? Reb Manish, right? Miludmir. 22nd day of Tammuz, right? 5648. So that's when she died in 1888. And then it says down here, it says something or other minashim, v'yohala shel Torah tivorach, right? So she should, of all of the women in the tent of Torah, may she be blessed. That's what it says there. Then it says something else down here, which I can't read. Okay, and there's people that have put some stones on there, as you can see. Thank you. Excellent. Shkoach. Right? Mount of Olives. Find a grave website. There it is.
No, that was awesome. Thank you.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
That was interesting. Thanks, John.
Okay. So we don't have that much time. I in just in case I lined up another story, but we may have to go fast. You want to leave it at this, or you want to go into a story? What do you want?
I have to leave right at 3, so I can't.
Yeah, we're not going to go. I have another meeting at 3. So what do you want to do? We've got 12 minutes.
Can we read it in 12 minutes?
You want to read it fast? Okay, here we go.
You think it's 12 minutes readable?
I mean, I have to, now what happened to it? It disappeared. Oh, you know what? Maybe when you became the thing. So hold on one second.
We can start it today and finish it next week.
Right. Okay, here we go. Oh, there you are. I don't need this. I need this. And now we do this. Okay, so I'm going to go like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. Here we go. Nathan of the Radiance. Okay, so and we'll see how this might relate or not relate to our to the stories from last week and today. Okay.
Want me to read it?
Yes, so we'll start from here.
There was a certain wealthy Jew named Nathan de Tsutsita.
Yeah.
Tsutsita.
Mm-hmm.
Who loved a wedded woman named Hannah. Her husband was exceedingly poor, but she was beautiful beyond compare. This Nathan grew ill on account of Hannah. The physicians who visited him told him, "You cannot be healed."
Same name, Hannah, right?
You cannot be healed until you lie with her. The sages of Israel declared, "Let him perish rather than commit this transgression." The physicians insisted, "Let her come and talk to him." Impossible, declared the sages, and his malady lasted a very long time. Now Hannah's husband owed many debts, and was put in prison because he had nothing to give his creditors. His wife used to spin by day and night and bought food with the money she earned and brought it to the prison. He spent a long time in the prison and felt fit to die. So one day he said to his wife, "Anybody who redeems a single soul from death is as though he had delivered many souls. I am sick and tired of my life in prison. Take pity on me and go to Nathan and ask him to lend you the money to deliver my soul from death." Then she told him, "Surely you know and must have heard that he is sick and about to die on my account. Messengers from him come to me day after day with large sums of money, but I refuse to accept it and tell them that he will never see me. Now, how can I go borrow money from him? If you were in your right mind, you could not say such a thing to me. So the length of your imprisonment must have put you out of your mind." She was very angry with him and went home in a fury, never went to see him for 3 days.
Okay, so what's happened, right? There's this very wealthy guy. He has his eye on this woman, Hannah. She is the wife of a poor guy. He is now in prison and miserable because of all of his debts. And he's sending her to him, to the rich guy, to ask for money, knowing, as she accuses him, knowing that he is putting her in grave jeopardy because this guy wants her. So she says to him, "How can you be so crass and cruel to put your own wife in that kind of a situation?" Go ahead.
On the 4th day, she felt sorry for him and said, "Let me go and see him before he perishes." So she went and found him on the verge of death, and he said to her, "May the Holy and Blessed One demand from you an accounting for the injustice done to me and seize you for this sin against me. For I can see that you wish me to perish here, and then you will wed Nathan. Divorce me and let me be," she said, "and then I shall go to him." "Why?" he answered. "This is what I said, that you wish to marry him." Then she cried aloud and flung herself down on the ground and said, "Who has heard the like of this? Who has seen such a thing? This man tells me, 'Go and commit adultery and pollute yourself in order to get me out of prison.'" And her husband answered, "Go away and let me be until the Holy and Blessed One has mercy on me."
All right. So a classic case of a married couple not understanding each other.
Then she went home and thought about her distress and her husband's too, and she took pity on him. She purified her heart and prayed and said, "I entreat you, O Lord, deliver me and aid me in order that I may not engage in a transgression." And then she went to the house of Nathan. His attendants saw her and hastened to tell Nathan, "Hannah is at the gate. If it is true," said he, "you will all be freed." Then she entered the courtyard, and his maidservant said to him, "See, Hannah is at the courtyard. Then you too will be set free," he said to her. So Hannah came to him. He lifted up his eyes and said, "Madam, tell me what you desire and what you wish, and it will be given to you. Whatever you request will be done." "My only request," she said, "is that you should lend my husband such and such a sum, for he is imprisoned, and you will be righteous in the eyes of the Lord." Then he ordered his servants to bring out the money and gave her what she desired. And he said to her, "See now, I have done what you wish, and you know how ill I am because I love you. Now do my wish and make me whole again." Then Hannah answered him, "I am in your hands and under your wings, and here I cannot refuse you. But let me tell you that this is the time when you can gain life of the world to come. Take care not to lose your reward and all that is good in the world for so small a thing. And do not make that world for so small a thing. And do not make me prohibited to my husband. Assume that you have achieved your desire, but do not lose so much that it is good on my account, so that you will be left only with something that must finish in bitter remorse. And think of the anguish." I lost my place here. "And think of the anguish imposed by the Holy and Blessed One, and do not do something that must finally avenge itself on you. Here you have been a little while, yet you will prevent yourself from gaining long life and a good reward in the world, in this world and the world to come. Something that a man can achieve only by dint of much toil and exhaustion. Yet you can fulfill the will of your Creator in a brief hour if you merely hearken to my counsel and reject your lust and evil inclination. And all will be well with you. When the man heard her words, he rebuked his evil will, and he rose from his bed and flung himself to the ground and prayed before the Lord to conquer his lust and break his desire and conduct him along the good and proper path and forgive his iniquities and enable him to repent entirely. And the Lord responded and consented. Then Nathan said to Hannah, "Blessed are you before the Lord, and blessed is your sound sense, which has now prevented me from performing this transgression, and has indeed been a salvation to me. Go to your home in peace." So the woman went and redeemed her husband from prison. She told him what she had done, but he would not believe her, suspecting that Nathan had been with her, but was hiding it from him.
But she was
But she was hiding it from him. Now in due course, Rabbi Akiva looked out his window and saw a man riding a horse with a radiance and a brightness around his head that shone like the sun. He summoned one of his disciples and said to him, "Who is that man riding on horseback?" And the disciple said, "This is Nathan the whoremaster." Then he said to his disciples, Do you see anything around his head?" "No," said they. Then he told them, "Bring him to me quickly." And he said to him, "My son, there is a great light over your head as you pass, and I know that you're going to inherit the world to come. Now tell me what you have done." So he told him about Hannah. Rabbi Akiva was so astonished that he could have restrained and subdued his lust and become so completely penitent. And he said to him, "Indeed, you have done a great deed, and therefore the Holy and Blessed One has caused the light to shine around your head. This great radiance I have seen. If it is here in the world, how much more so in the world to come? And you, my son, hearken unto me and take your seat before me so that I can teach you Torah." He did so and took his place before Rabbi Akiva. And he who opens and does not close opened the portals of his heart to his Torah. And within a short while, he achieved a high degree of wisdom and reached Rabbi Akiva's rank. In due course, Hannah's husband passed by the schools of Rabbi Akiva, and there he saw Nathan the
Tzutzita.
seated at the same level as Rabbi Akiva. He asked one of his disciples how Nathan could have achieved this, and he was told the whole tale. Then the man believed his wife. The jealousy that had possessed him passed away. He returned home and kissed his wife on the brow and said to her, "Forgive me and pardon me for having suspected you about Nathan. Today I saw him seated beside Rabbi Akiva, and I asked, and they told me all that happened. May the Holy and Blessed One reward you twofold and fourfold. I was in great distress and anguish in my soul until the Holy and Blessed One aided me by revealing this matter to me today."
All right, that's it.
That's it.
We made
That's
it.
it.
What a schmuck. He doesn't believe his wife.
People
Yeah,
believe gossip. People believe what they want to believe or think they believe, even though they're told the truth.
any other comments?
I mean, did I misunderstand it, or did he say, "Go get the money from this guy. I don't care what you have to do. If you love me, you'll just get the money"? Like, did he not throw her under the bus
He did.
and then said, "I'm not going near you because you defiled yourself"?
Right. Remember,
But she didn't defile
that thing,
herself.
that was the thing, and in the top where she said, "All right, you know what? If this is what I have to do, at least divorce me, so that I'll have legal, innocence, and then I'll do this on your behalf. I'm going to do this for you."
Did he
Right?
divorce her?
And he said, see, it proves that you wanted to sleep with him, right? It proves. So this is the vicious kind of cycle of fear and suspicion and putting people in this kind of like box that that's almost impossible for them to escape from, except under amazing courage and virtue. So another very sad story about male power over good women, and what the women have to endure to just survive that kind of stuff. All right, we're gonna close down for today. Yasher koach. Two
Thank you.
stories in one day, not bad.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.